you're looking to dive into topics on how to live a happier, healthier, more fit, and long lifespan, then you've come to the right podcast. Livin the Dream with me, Coach Damian Evans. Together, we will explore the topics on all things health, fitness, and wellness. Together, we will be lifelong learners on this journey to living the ultimate dream. What up, Dream Team? Coach D here, coming at you from beautiful sunny San Diego. And in today's MEGAphone episode, we will be shouting out the creator of the Doctor's Kitchen, Dr. Rupy Aujla. Dr. Rupy Aujla is spelled Rupyaujla. He wrote a really well done article outlining the basics of eating for the purposes of mitigating the negative responses of inflammation in our diets. And I definitely think it's worth a shout out and a share. So eating for inflammation, it's amazing how many times I see the quote unquote inflammation word as a concept coming up in different medical specialties as one of the potential causes of disease. It has almost become a unifying theory that links conditions of the modern world to our lifestyles. You might think that I'm just talking about swollen ankles that happen after an injury, or the redness that surrounds a cut on the skin. But high blood pressure, heart disease, dementia, Alzheimer's, diabetes, and mental health problems all have links to an imbalance of inflammation in the body at the cellular level. What is it? It's amazing how many times I see products labeled as anti-inflammatory, and I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what inflammation really is. After listening, it's my hope that this is going to give you a more tangible idea about the role of inflammation in our health, as well as how to tackle the problems related to an imbalance of this essential system in our bodies. Inflammation is your body's natural response, normal response, to events that cause damage to cells, like an injury or an infection. The process involves proteins being released in response to the damage, and these proteins send signals to the cells of the immune system to come and help. This is usually a short-lived adaptive response, and it involves coordination of many complex signals and organs. The inflammation process is very important. Without it, our cells would not be aware of bacteria causing something like a simple skin infection. And leaving the bacteria undetected on our body, in our skin, could lead to an uncontrolled severe infection with significant consequences. Inflammation is critical for infection prevention and to keep the body alert. We have, in essence, evolved to be able to fight injections and a host of other stressors to the human body, effectively and swiftly using inflammation as an important tool. However, inflammation is meant to be a temporary protective response, temporary. Whether that's a reaction to a knee injury or an infection in your digestive tract. Inflammation is essentially a big nudge to your body, letting it know something is just not quite right and it needs to be addressed swiftly. Inflammation is meant to be a short-lived process that resolves over hours, days, or at worst, weeks. However, what we are witnessing in modern society is a persistent, low-grade inflammation over long periods of time, also referred to as meta-inflammation. Today, we have a number of seemingly small and insignificant stressors that create subtle inflammation over long periods of time, and it can manifest in a multitude of symptoms. These range from a subtle and vague, such as I'm fatigued or I have lack of mental clarity or just this little skin irritation, to the more pronounced symptoms of including things like pain, mood disorders, and even heart disease. These symptoms will obviously overlap with other causes, but we're becoming more aware of the damaging effects of inflammation imbalance that is at least in part to be related to these and many other conditions over the long term. Examples of stressors potentially causing low-grade inflammation include excess sugar consumption, psychological stresses that aren't dealt with, especially sedentary behaviors. Nowadays, it's hard to find someone that doesn't have a sedentary job. Even things like accumulation of fat tissue or other nutrient deficiencies, including vitamin D, omega-3, and other different micronutrients that you might be deficient in. Depending on our ability to tolerate these factors, the result can be low-grade meta-inflammation. And this culmination of seemingly small, insignificant stressors can potentially tip us into a pro-inflammatory state. This puts us at a risk for a wide spectrum of conditions that inflammation is related to. This pro-inflammatory imbalance is what we're going to refer to as inflammation for the rest of this episode, and what can be rebalanced with delicious foods and an enjoyable, healthy lifestyle. So I want you to think of an old school balancing weight scale, similar to kind of like a teeter-totter. On one side, you have pro-inflammatory, and on the other side, you have anti-inflammatory. When there's more of one, then the scale is going to be tipped and one side falls while the other rises. Like if we put an elephant on one side of a teeter-totter and a chihuahua on the other, you know what's going to happen. So let's, with that picture in mind, on the pro-inflammatory side of things, we have loss of bacterial diversity, things like antibiotic overuse or lack of fiber. On the pro-inflammatory side, we have nutrient deficiency. If you're deficient in nutrients, this could cause an inflammatory state in the body. Definitely stress, distress, the bad kinds of stress. You got things like work, traffic, emails, family, finances, stuff like that. On the pro-inflammatory side of things, you have social isolation. It is now being discovered that social isolation, not having a community around you, feeling alone, this is pro-inflammatory, which is really interesting. Things like excess sugar, which we already know are pro-inflammatory. You have things like poor quality fats, like lots of trans fats in your diet. Things like sleep loss, sedentary behavior, and urban environments. Just being in a city, an urban environment, is known to be pro-inflammatory. So that's one side of the scale. On the other side of the scale, the anti-inflammatory side, we have whole, colorful plant foods, anti-inflammatory. We have high fiber diets, high fiber, anti-inflammatory. We have stress regulation like meditation or regular movement. We have sleep hygiene, getting into a sleep routine, making sure that you wake up at the same time every day and that before you go to bed, you have a sleep schedule, you have a sleep routine. Community, having a community around you is anti-inflammatory. A sense of purpose. Natural environment exposure. If you can be a part of a natural environment, maybe you live out in the woods or you're frequently able to go to a place where it's not quite so urban. And then, of course, mind-body exercises are anti-inflammatory. And while I want you to appreciate the importance of what inflammation can do as a good thing to us, as a necessary mechanism in our body, when we examine the triggers of inflammation in modern life using this scale, it really becomes obvious why the balance of inflammation has really become skewed toward the pro-inflammatory side of things. This meta-inflammation, as I've alluded to, has a role in many conditions, including mental health disorders such as depression, high blood pressure, and insulin resistance, which is also linked to the development of poor sugar control and then ultimately type 2 diabetes. It's all interconnected. With this in mind, it's important to try and find effective ways to prevent this imbalance. And you can do this from occurring on this scale analogy by looking at some of those things that are pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory, and what can we do to restore the equilibrium by maybe throwing in some of the things on the anti-inflammatory side. Colorful plant foods, fiber, meditation, regular movement, sleep hygiene, community, sense of purpose, natural environment exposure, and mind-body exercises. Stopping the triggers is so important. The reassuring fact is that we can manage inflammation effectively and simply with changes to what we eat and how we live. And it's not expensive. It doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to require excessive interventions or huge modifications. And we're here to guide you through this process. We have many solutions within our control. We can be the CEO of our own health, and we can broadly categorize this into 2 steps. The first is to stop the pro-inflammation triggers in the first place. And the second is to introduce diet and lifestyle changes to actively reduce inflammation using some of these anti-inflammatory processes. We possess the ability and mechanisms to purposely reduce the inflammation response as well. One of the most powerful and effective ways to stop inflammation in its tracks is by assessing our diet, which in many cases is the most obvious and clear trigger. Looking at a number of large population studies, the benefit of eating a large vegetarian diet from the perspective of reducing inflammation, it's just undeniable. A number of researchers have demonstrated that eating a Western diet, the standard American diet, made up of refined sugars and carbohydrates, large amounts of processed animal protein, ultra-processed hyper-palatable foods, and poor quality fats, this is related to higher amounts of inflammation signals when measured in our blood. Conversely, on the other side of things, putting more plant food and fiber in your diet, including good quality fats that we can obtain from things like nuts and seeds, and eating less processed animal protein, getting the great quality animal protein, all of this is linked to significantly lower measures of inflammation. Essentially, it is a fairly Mediterranean style of eating, and we can reasonably infer that these studies that reduced inflammation, it's related to less disease and general health protection if you look at it from a big 3,000-foot view. Let's address the topic of excess body fat. Fat, also known as adipose tissue, is a very useful part of our bodies that we have required during our evolution. It's how we got to where we are right now. Without being able to store body fat, we wouldn't have survived long periods where food was scarce. This explains why those who have a genetic predisposition for putting on fat, particularly around the organs and the waist, may have actually been able to have a little bit of an evolutionary advantage when it comes to like the harsh winters, the famines, the lack of nutrition or energy that they may have encountered back in the day. Essentially, it would have acted as a storage form of energy that was readily accessible when food was not available. That would have been huge. Today, though, the ability to put on and retain fat is a clear disadvantage. If you consider our current food environment, it's full of convenience, energy-dense and nutritionally poor options. We can get it anywhere at any time. And with no famine around the corner, there isn't any use to carry fat on our bodies, and we do not end up burning it for energy. So what happens is to add insult to the situation, if we do accumulate fat predominantly around our organs and our waistline, this is metabolically active. That is to say that it promotes this inflammatory signal that can contribute to the burden of diseases that we've mentioned. That's right, your body fat is an organ. And when your body fat, this organ, is too full, it leaks its damaging contents, creating an inflammatory environment. This is why the scientific community promotes weight loss and reducing one's BMI, body mass index, as a strategy to counter the effects of excess fatty tissue. While I agree that fat tissue is pro-inflammatory and people who lose fat can reduce their inflammatory burden, a narrow focus on weight loss alone is sometimes a negative goal for a lot of people who struggle to understand the wider context. If you just tell someone to lose weight, they don't really understand it. I believe health can be independent of weight loss or whatever your weight is. You can be healthy at a lot of different weights, but it's your lifestyle, it's your mindset, and it's your diet that are your biggest determinants of a happy, healthy life. I'd really rather you focus largely on building healthy habits with well-being as your main goal, rather than just focusing on that number that's on the scale that you stand on. When you adopt a diet that reduces refined sugar and carbohydrates, and it replaces those sugar and carbohydrates with fiber and largely colorful vegetables and fruits, coupled with your lifestyle changes, you are going to lower inflammation if that is how you attack this. These are also the habits that can protect you against the dangerous types of fat accumulated around your body's organs. This fat is known as visceral fat. And visceral fat promotes inflammation and leads to health problems big time. Before we naively use our scales as a measure of success, I really implore you to embrace healthy habits and the subjective measurement of how you feel as a better marker of health. Next, let's talk about supporting your gut. We are in constant communication with our environment via our digestive tract. And so it should come as no surprise that inflammation is heavily influenced by the microbes living in our gut, our microbiota. The different types of microbes, such as bacteria and fungi, living mostly in our gut. These are important modulators of inflammation. A diverse and healthy population of microbes is associated with lower levels of inflammation, and there are a number of mechanisms behind how they achieve this. Your gut microbes support inflammation balancing by increasing antioxidant production and reducing oxidative stress. They maintain the health of the tissues in your digestive tract that lowers gut inflammation, which reduces the likelihood of foreign material inappropriately passing into your bloodstream. Inappropriate material going into your bloodstream can cause your body to react. Your microbes protect you from infections and improve our ability to control sugar in the blood. Plus, they actively secrete chemical signals that calm our immune system. What? These microbes actively secrete chemical responses that calm our immune system, preventing an inappropriate inflammatory response. These and a number of other mechanisms are why a flourishing, diverse population of microbes is so important from the perspective of balancing inflammation. And as we discuss next, the most effective way of nurturing a healthy microbiota is with your food. There is a huge scope for introducing specific bacterial strains to counter the ill effects of inflammation. And some studies have had promising results using probiotics. These are live bacterial strains in a supplemental form. But before you reach for whatever specifically designed strains of bacteria that are formulated with quote unquote anti-inflammatory claims, let me remind you that your microbiota is best served by a diverse plant-focused diet with plenty of fiber and a variety of colors. This is really the easiest and most effective way to support your microbes in an anti-inflammatory way. Next is a description of lifestyle changes and food that support your gut bugs and help prevent fat accumulation and balance inflammation through a variety of pathways. Food. Let's start with good quality fats. It's long been thought as a hindrance to health and wellness to have any types of fats in your diet because of fears of weight gain and risks to your heart. Fat makes you fat, right? But once again, it comes down to the quality of the fats in your diet than purely just the amount of fat. Dietary fatty acids from oily fish and nuts, these things can positively impact inflammation by changing the expression of your genes, influencing the inflammation pathways within your cells as well. They're also the building blocks of molecules that are used to signal your body's anti-inflammatory response. Whole sources of fats from plants such as walnuts, macadamia nuts, pumpkin seeds, and sunflower seeds, and of course, a good high-quality extra virgin olive oil. These are all great sources of fats that have been shown to be anti-inflammatory. These types of fats contain more of the omega-3 fats that can balance out inflammation. Dr. Rupa, he tends to use olive oil super liberally in his cooking, and he uses the highest quality cold press varieties wherever possible. He does this for both flavor as well as function. Moving on to polyphenols. From fats to polyphenols, these are a category of health-promoting chemicals that we find in food, and there are literally thousands of polyphenols. In general, the colored vegetables lining your superfood grocery aisles are great sources of these potent compounds that can target processes related to inflammation. These targets have long and confusing names like protein complex, nuclear factor kappa B, NFB, and the enzyme cyclooxygenase, which also happen to be molecular targets for medications that we prescribe for things like arthritis and pain. Now, this isn't to suggest that we can or should replace drugs with food, but the polyphenols that you find in a crisp apple or a humble pea or vibrant butternut squash all possess the ability to modulate inflammation by impacting these and many other processes involved in inflammation. A rainbow diet is the easiest way to guarantee a collection of polyphenols that can lower the inflammatory burden. Green foods of particular mention are undoubtedly the greens. The impact of vegetables including broccoli, rocket, kale, bok choy, and sprouts are absolutely incredible, which is why I try to eat something like these daily, if not at most meal times. And yes, that includes breakfast. If you can get some vegetables in at breakfast, you're killing it. These ingredients in these greens contain many chemicals, including some well-studied compounds, things like sulforaphane and indole-3-carbinol, that prevent oxidative stress. These are some of the most technologically advanced quote-unquote drugs, and they're only available in your grocery store. Get them on your plate. Greens. Red foods. Deep red, colorful foods contain a particular type of flavonoid called anthocyanin. This is well known to be a potent anti-inflammatory chemical. We get these from cheap, accessible ingredients such as red cabbage, blue and red colored berries, chard, as well as more exotic ingredients such as black rice, also called forbidden rice, red carrots or purple potatoes. The benefits of red foods are complemented by other colors in your diet. Now, I am by no means suggesting that only eating red and green foods for inflammation is the answer. But the discovering of how and why these foods reduce oxidative stress and balance inflammation, this information is so exciting. It's enough for Dr. Rupa and many other health experts to get those into their diets regularly. So green foods, red foods, and then also high fiber foods. Higher glycemic index or GI foods that release sugar into the bloodstream rapidly are associated with greater inflammation measures in the blood. Regular consumption of these high GI foods, such as refined cereals and grains, breads, pastas, cakes, biscuits, no matter whether these things are labeled quote unquote healthy or whole grain or gluten-free or anything else that is a marketing ploy that has an apparent health connotation, all of those things, they're still associated with a higher inflammatory burden. This is not a call to remove all of these foods entirely from your diet. I would never want to rob someone of the pleasure of enjoying delicious, freshly prepared pasta or a warm, fluffy donut with sticky jam. But having a greater awareness of why these foods are not the best foods to eat regularly, this will mold your daily choices and heighten your understanding of what health-promoting foods mean for you. A simple way to reduce inflammation is simply switching from carbohydrates that quickly release into your blood as sugar, things like sodas, juices, breads, or other simple carbohydrates. Switch those to foods that are higher in fiber and thus release sugar more slowly. Sweet potatoes, vegetables, fruits, quinoa, chickpea pasta. Other examples include split peas, artichokes, onions, whole apples, black beans, and yellow lentils. In addition, these foods positively enhance the population of gut microbes by giving them a good food source to flourish on. And we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about spices. Spices, exotic spices such as turmeric and clove. These have become popular topics among those trying to lead a healthier lifestyle. While I welcome greater research into the exciting compounds found within these spices, especially as they may have a role in treatment of inflammatory disorders such as osteoarthritis, psoriasis, and rheumatoid arthritis, they are by no means the only ones. As a general rule of thumb, a wide range of spices contain dense concentration of phytochemicals and micronutrients, which provide a variety of antioxidants that have the potential to reduce inflammation. Rather than concentrating your diet around specific spices that you may not even enjoy or have access to, a simple strategy is to use those that you appreciate the flavor of. All of the dishes that we cook for dinner usually use plenty of spices and herbs, and there is a clinical as well as culinary reason behind this. There are so many of these amazing ingredients that you can include into your cooking. These range from mint, basil, marjoram, to sumac, cinnamon and cayenne, parsley. You gotta include a bunch of spices in your cooking. And we even did a whole list of Dr. Mark Hyman's favorite spices in one of our previous episodes. If you'd like me to send that to you, let me know. Moving on, let's move on to your lifestyle. These changes in the diet can serve to improve our balance from a state of pro-inflammation to one that is more harmonious with the intended function of our bodies. Your lifestyle, however, is important, and these practices are just as impactful. First, you have to slow down your eating. You have to become more mindful when you're eating. Dr. Rupa used to find himself running around from appointment to appointment with a snack in his hand, eating at his desk while he was sifting through mounting paperwork, maybe during his clinics, or squeezing in meals between 10-minute breaks. Many of his colleagues and patients feel this, and I know that you probably can relate to this. Even when we're not really that rushed, what are we doing? We're eating in front of our screens. We scoff down food at an unimaginable pace, and we hardly ever take the time to appreciate the ingredients themselves. A measurement of stress in the body is a hormone called cortisol. Cortisol is shown to be lowered if food is eaten slower and more mindfully. The state in which food is consumed can be just as impactful on the body as the food item itself. Let me say that again. The state in which food is consumed can be just as impactful on the body as the food that you're eating itself. As a simple practice, Dr. Rupa recommends his patients take a few gentle, deep breaths before starting to eat. Also, remove your screens and do this in an effort to slow down the process so that you can give your full attention to the food that you're eating. And perhaps you can have a conversation around them with people in your life. What the food is, where it came from, the ingredients, how it makes you feel, how it tastes, just having an overall mindfulness about what you're eating. Let's talk about mind-body interventions. Mind-body interventions like Tai Chi and meditation have been shown to reduce the expression of genes which code for proteins that lead to inflammation. In many studies, different types of stress-relieving and relaxation techniques have demonstrated significant anti-inflammatory effects. There should be no doubt that stress and psychological ill health are associated with inflammation. And so conversely, stress-relieving techniques should be anti-inflammatory, which they are being found in studies to be anti-inflammatory. Think of mind-body interventions as any practice that encourages your inner calm, whether that be the simple act of reading in a quiet space, or doing a meditation practice, or doing yoga practice. You could even include breath work into this category. Walking. If the thought of joining a yoga class or even deep breathing is just too overwhelming, you'll be pleased to hear about the mountains of research that consider the effectiveness of simple walks in nature. The Japanese practice of Shinrin Yoku, which literally translates as forest bathing, has a large body of evidence examining the psychological as well as mental health benefits of this practice. Walking offers a myriad of benefits, along with a reduction in overall resting heart rate, blood pressure, and improvements in mood. Forest bathing practices have reduced laboratory measures of inflammation such as cortisol and inflammatory proteins measured in the blood. Taking yourself to a park or a forest at least once a week for a relaxing stroll could be one of the most hassle-free and effective ways to reduce your inflammatory burden. And you could do this all without having to adjust your diet or do much else at all. Next is sleep. Sleep, given the number of homeostatic mechanisms that occur during sleep, It's not surprising that even a single night's lack of shut-eye increases your inflammatory signals in the body. Getting a bad night of sleep, inflammation shoots up. During sleep, our blood pressure lowers, our temperature drops, and levels of rejuvenating hormones like melatonin that have powerful antioxidant effects rise to their highest levels. As told in exceptionally certain terms in his book, Why We Sleep, the sleep medicine expert Professor Matthew Walker has warned that a lack of sleep puts us at a greater risk for diabetes, for cancer, and for cardiovascular disease. It's often noted that people with high inflammation as a result of conditions such as arthritis, diabetes, or obesity, they often have disturbed sleep. So is it the chicken or the egg? Do they have disturbed sleep because they have these diseases? Or is their sleep somehow causing the fact that they have these diseases? It appears that inflammation and the proteins that signal inflammation, they all have an interconnected relationship to sleep and may even regulate our need for slumber. The advice for now is to at least allow yourself the opportunity to enjoy about 7 to 9 hours of rest per day. But remember, this is just a suggestion to the larger population. You are an individual and you have to figure out how much rest/sleep works best for you. Put your electronic devices away a couple hours before bed. Eat early enough, if possible, and give yourself potentially the best dose of anti-inflammatory medication available to us: sleep. If we can harness the incredible effects of not only our food, but the anti-inflammatory potential of our lifestyle, we could drastically reduce the problems that excess inflammation poses to our health. What this episode represents is a medicinal package for many patients without the need for strong drug interventions. Now, we should definitely utilize pharmaceuticals when necessary, but the primary consideration should always be what we put on our plates and the way that we live our lives. These should be the first therapeutic interventions before we ever entertain more invasive measures that can carry a greater risk versus benefit. So, takeaways. To conclude this episode, here are some foods that really help the body regulate inflammation. Greens. You should eat for inflammation greens. Broccoli, rocket. Rocket is a leafy green with small dark leaves. It has a spicy, peppery, mustard-like flavor. It's mostly used in salads, but can also be found when adding it to pizza or tossed into a pasta. Vinegar and citrus balance rocket's flavor very well. So broccoli, rocket, kale, bok choy, sprouts. Polyphenols to eat for inflammation. Polyphenols, apples, peas, butternut squash. Spices to eat for inflammation. You got turmeric, clove, sumac, cinnamon, basil, ginger, rosemary. Rosemary's great. High quality fats to eat for inflammation. High quality fats, walnuts, macadamia nuts, pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, extra virgin olive oil. Anthocyanin foods for inflammation. Red cabbage, blue and red colored berries, chard, black or forbidden rice, red carrots, purple potatoes. And then low glycemic index foods for inflammation. Split peas, artichokes, onions, black beans, and yellow lentils. Eat the rainbow, all the colors from real whole foods, and you will notice the difference. And that's it, my friends, for this week's MEGAphone episode. Each week, we're going to focus on sharing information that will help you with your health, fitness, and wellness journey. Share the knowledge that you gained with your friends, your family, and hold each other accountable. If you enjoyed this content, it helps a ton if you could post on your social media stories a screenshot of this episode with just one takeaway, one thing that you learned. And make sure you tag me and share your journey. I would love to hear it. Tag me at Livin the Dream _podcast or at Coach Damien _SD, at Livin the Dream _podcast or at Coach Damien _SD. Let us know how this episode benefited you. Let's get more people on this lifelong learner train and join the Livin the Dream team. Message us if you have any suggestions or tips that will help your Livin the Dream team that we can discuss on future episodes. I will be right here with you, working on making us stronger, happier, and healthier humans. Until next time, friends, keep living the dream.